Waterfronts are magical places to walk, sit, relax, or meet with friends, and Toronto, on the shore of Lake Ontario, has a pretty great waterfront, with easy access in, out, and around the whole city. But how do you serve a waterfront with transit? Let's take a closer look at Toronto, which actually does fairly well in this regard. A waterfront at its best is probably a giant linear park, with a mix of uses to bring people to the area, as well as food, events, and other activities to keep them there day or night. Great views also do help. My favorite thing about Toronto's waterfront on the shores of the massive Lake Ontario is the modal layering though. But what is that? Well, as I talked about in my recent video about Helsinki and how it uses different transit modes usually have different strengths, and they're usually at their best when combined in a complementary way. For example, along a linear corridor you could have nice pedestrian paths, cycleways, buses, and a subway, all providing travel for different trips across different distances and connecting to one another. Toronto's waterfront actually does a really good job of this, well, west of Bay Street at least. We'll talk about the waterfront east of Bay Street in a future video. Originally, the most important street on the city's waterfront, Queen's Quay, was actually not very nice at all, but in the 1990s, streetcars, or LRT as some signs and locals call them, was added to the street. Unfortunately though, the sidewalks and streetscape were not exactly the most attractive, so in the 2010s, Waterfront Toronto, an organization formed of the City of Toronto, the Province of Ontario, and the Canadian federal government, undertook a redesign and rebuild of the street that created more and better space for cyclists and pedestrians, as well as moving the rail alignment to the side, generally separating cars from vulnerable road users. This is an aesthetically pleasing design, and the idea is that since there aren't that many intersections on the waterfront side of the road, and because the ones that do exist aren't all that busy, I mean, these are mostly parks, that the side alignment would lead to less crossings between streetcars and cars. And the nice thing about walking or cycling next to streetcars is, well, they run on tracks, so you don't really need to worry about them swerving into you. With that said though, the tram right-of-way is a bit confusing to drivers. Something a different surface treatment like green track or pavers or otherwise better road design might help with. In some sections in particular, it's not uncommon to see a confused driver driving down the streetcar right-of-way, and it is a frustratingly common occurrence that a driver drives into the streetcar tunnels towards Union Station, gets caught, runs away from their car, and blocks service for a few hours. As I mentioned before, there is a bike path, and loads of pedestrian space here too, though the initial design also had similar design issues to the streetcar and car right-of-way. Too much open space and not enough clear differentiation means tourists and even locals frequently walk in or block the cycle track, and because the cycle track is only narrowly separated from the streetcar right-of-way, people often jump out of the way of a bike and into the way of a tram, which leads to a lot of horns being blown. In my opinion, other cities like Vancouver do a much better job of this, with clear delineation even in kind of crappy areas and plentiful clear signage. That being said, Toronto does appear to be working on this by adding planters to better delineate the space dedicated to pedestrians, cyclists, and transit. Now, what about the modal layering? So the neat thing of course is you can walk to locations all over the place on the waterfront, and there's lots of space to sit and chat or mill about as well if you're waiting for friends or an appointment. For cyclists, there's a high-quality separated east-west route along almost 100% of the waterfront, and you can get up or down from the waterfront with passable bike infrastructure at a number of points, including the Garrison Crossing, which is great for watching the trains, as well as Simcoe, Yonge, Lower Sherbourne, and Cherry. None of these connections are really amazing, and the lack of a good one at Spadina and Bathurst is pretty lame, but it's something. And fortunately, the waterfront is teeming with shared bikes on some of the biggest racks in the city. These very full bike racks are good, but if they're too full, you can't dock a bike here, which is problematic, so that is an issue that needs to get sorted out. Now, you come to RMTransit for the transit, so let's talk about how transit connects up. As you might know, there are effectively 3 streetcar routes which serve Toronto's waterfront. The 509 Harbourfront, which travels from Union to Exhibition every few minutes, both of which are a short walk from the lake. Overlapping the 509 at the western and eastern ends of the lakefront streetcar right-of-way are the 511 Bathurst and 510 Spadina respectively, which run north-south through the western part of downtown. These streetcar services provide a really great medium-speed service along the water and also provide really easy connections to bikes or walking, allowing you to get to your final destination really quickly without getting cold or wet in the winter. Fortunately, streetcars aren't the only option for transit to the waterfront though. The subway network's closest connection is really only at Union Station on Line 1, where you can walk a short distance or take an underground streetcar, which is basically a subway, right, down to the water. Both the Bathurst and Spadina streetcars provide seamless within-station connections to Line 2 of the subway, meaning you can easily connect from most of the subway network to the Waterfront via a single transfer. But there's also Go Regional Rail, which literally has a line called the Lakeshore Line, of which the Lakeshore West is particularly relevant because it stops at both Union Station and Exhibition, and pre-COVID it was running about every 15 minutes all day long. Headways aren't quite back there yet, but the trips on the Lakeshore West are still faster than taking the streetcar. What's nice about it is that these GO stations are super intermodal, so you can change at either Union or Exhibition to a streetcar for the last mile or walk or grab a bike share, which is where the modal layering really starts to pay dividends in all of the options it offers you. And that's not even mentioning that the streetcar network goes even further, 2 more stations along the Lakeshore West line to Long Branch, where it provides more intermodal opportunities. And this will be augmented by another connection at the new Park Lawn GO station, which should also have a streetcar loop and will serve the very dense Humber Bay Shores neighborhood and Humber Bay Park. One transit mode you probably don't associate with Toronto is the ferry, but the city does actually have a handful of routes to the Toronto Islands. They aren't great and should be made compatible with the Presto Smart Card, but the connection to them from other transit modes is actually pretty good, thanks to the Queen's Quay underground streetcar station, which is kind of Toronto's 76th subway station if you ask me. As it turns out, the old and not so attractive ferries will be replaced with new, also not so attractive but electric ferries in the coming years, which is quite exciting. Toronto actually already has one of those, and it operates on what is easily one of the shortest ferry routes in the world. You see, on the Toronto Islands, right off the Toronto Harbour, is the Toronto Billy Bishop Airport, which I have mixed feelings about. For one, a lot of people don't like a big part of the Toronto Islands' limited green space near some of the densest neighborhoods in North America's 4th largest city being used up by an airport. On the other hand, Billy Bishop's unique location allows for some really cool stuff. For one, unlike almost every other airport in North America, a lot of people can comfortably walk or cycle here. There's even a bike share station. And better yet, a short walk away and you can get to the 509 streetcar, and get to the financial district in 10 minutes or so. There's also a cute little shuttle bus from here to Union Station. Now, Toronto's main airport Pearson is pretty transit accessible, but Billy Bishop is basically impossible to beat, and at the same time, the island airport focuses more on regional flights to places like Chicago, Washington, New York, and Boston, as well as lots of cities in Canada. This is really just another transportation layer, but on the intercity level, which of course is also available with intercity trains from Union Station. I mentioned a ferry, and that's needed because the island airport is on, well, an island, just across the channel from the waterfront, requiring a 150-meter ferry ride on a cute little ferry. Fortunately, you don't really need to use the ferry now, as an underground pedestrian tunnel opened in 2015. To be clear, I think a great potential project could reuse the airport pedestrian tunnel to provide access to the Toronto Islands, alongside some significant new pedestrian and cycling routes. All of this isn't to say that the waterfront doesn't have its issues. Some areas like Exhibition in particular still have way too much parking. Lakeshore Boulevard is some level beyond pedestrian hostile, and as mentioned before, certain road and public space designs need work. But the access to mobility, the intermodality, and the public spaces are great, and that's how a waterfront should be.